Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today is, again, February 25th, 2022. We're continuing our coverage of the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. And I wanted to take a couple of minutes and try to provide a commentary and just kind of compare and contrast the current operation and some of the information that we're hearing such as information coming out of the U.S. Pentagon in regards to this operation. So obviously, this is not it does not indicate any support for the Russian military. This is just again looking at the military perspective of what is happening. So. As we look at the current operation, we're roughly in day 2+ of this operation by the Russians into Ukraine, and quite frankly, this military challenge, this military operation, is in terms of invading the Ukraine with the operational objectives by the Russian military to uh, commit itself to regime change in Ukraine, which indicates that their military goals are to conquer large parts of the Ukraine, including the capital and significant other areas to the south and east as well. Now, right now, we're hearing from the Pentagon that the Russians are behind on their operational timetable. So again, what I want to look at is first just the actual challenge that the Russians are undertaking to invade the Ukraine. You have a Ukrainian military that, as I talked about in other episodes, is probably more proficient than the Iraqi military at the time the United States invaded Iraq in the 2003 invasion. And again, you can look at that very quickly in terms of the length of time that took, and you can also again compare and contrast the length of time that it may take the Russians to accomplish its military goals inside of the Ukraine. So I would anticipate at least 30 days, at least 30 days for the Russians to achieve a military victory. If you go back in history and you look at the German invasion of Poland, that is often looked at as one of the quickest military operations in history in terms of dismantling the Polish military, but that took over a month and then resulted in uh, tens of thousands of German casualties, with 17,000 German KIA'd in the invasion of Poland. During the United States, again, the operation into Iraq, I believe we were looking at right around 20, 23, 26 days of military operations until Baghdad capitulated and the United States moved up. So again, a good 20 days to move up towards Baghdad. And if you remember the initial opening stages of the conflict, when the United States at that point had complete air supremacy, it didn't really have to worry too much about Iraqi air defense assets, as a lot of those had been degraded over the course of the many weeks leading up to the actual ground invasion. And if you remember, the U.S. Was initially held up at Qasr, and the United States was in fact well behind some of their key their key time frames in terms of their military operation. And then further, as the U.S. Moved further up into Basra and Nasiriyah, the U.S. saw setbacks and were held up in its invasion of Iraq. So again, I think it's kind of disingenuous for the DoD to claim after day 2 the Russians are behind on their op plan in Ukraine. And again, not to try and pick sides or support the Russians. It's just facts are facts, and what is happening. This operation with the Russians attacking Ukraine, again, I view it as much more of a military challenge than the U.S. invasion of Iraq. I feel the Ukrainian military is probably better equipped, probably better trained, and probably much, much more motivated than the Iraqi army was under Saddam Hussein. So again, the whole concept that this conflict is going to end in 72 hours is just really ridiculous, and in all likelihood we're going to continue to see the Russians build up before they actually move into to Kiev. They have introduced about 60 of what appears to be 90 battalion tactical groups that have been introduced into Ukraine. So that they're holding back around 30 battalion tactical groups of varying size to exploit breakthroughs and operations. And obviously they're continuing to build up in Belarus. And my hunch is that the battlefield commander who was in charge of forces coming out of Belarus and moving towards Kiev probably was not ready, and but they felt they needed to prosecute this operation, so they went ahead and they jumped, and they probably weren't ready quite yet, and we continue to see these buildups occurring in Belarus. But to say that the Russians are behind on their any time frames is really just kind of ridiculous. It's day two of this, and it's probably day two of many days to come of this current operation. Another issue too is kind of the thought process centered around war. The difference between the Russians and the West, specifically the United States. The Russians are not as adverse to casualties as the United States is. They have a much different doctrine than the United States does as well. And I think you have to go back into history, and I think that is one of the main issues right now that a lot of people involved in this are not looking at, and that's history. And I think you really have to go back to World War II. You have to go back before World War II and look at especially the kind of suffering that the Russians dealt with during some World War II, and obviously the Great War and the Russian Civil War itself too. So there's a lot of history between Russia and Ukraine that I just don't think the West is looking at. I think the West is looking at near history. I think they're looking at the fall of the Soviet Union, but I believe that Putin is looking well beyond that and behind that, and that's what the West is not doing, and that's the disconnect between the two parties. I don't believe Putin is a madman, and I don't believe that he's trying to reestablish the old Soviet empire per se. But with that being said, I think the two sides greatly misunderstand each other, and I think you have to go back and you have to look again at the history of Russia, especially during World War II. Go into some of those battles during World War II. You have to look at the siege of Stalingrad, and which is no longer Stalingrad. You have to look at the siege of Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg. You have to look at the battles the Russians fought in Ukraine, driving the Germans out of these areas. And again, here in the West, we didn't deal with the same sort of trials and tribulations that the Russians did throughout their history, especially World War II. And that's what the Russians are looking at right now, and that's kind of what has led to this. And you can say what you want, you can declare him a madman, but he, meaning Putin, but he does have a thought process behind what he's doing and why he is doing it. He has a moral compass in terms of his nation state, and especially in terms of agreements, verbal agreements that were made to him and Boris Yeltsin in terms of not seeing the expansion of NATO into the Eastern Bloc countries. And unfortunately, that occurred, and that's now why we're sitting here watching what is happening today. So you have to look at history, near history, and you also have to look at not so near history as well, especially in terms of the trials and tribulations of the Russians. You have to do it. You can, and unfortunately, we're not doing that. And that's kind of where we're at right now. It may lead to even something much bigger and much worse. Have a good day, everybody.